Have you ever spent hours on a portrait only to have it looking flat and muddy? The colors don't match the reference, the skin looks dull, or something just feels off. If that's happening, you are probably making one of the 5 most common color mistakes that I see artists make. But the good news is that these mistakes are incredibly easy to fix once you know what to look for. In this video, I'll show you each mistake with clear examples, and I'll give you simple exercises that you can start practicing today to stop making these mistakes for good. This first mistake is the reason that so many portraits look flat, overly stylized, or just off. Value, the lightness or darkness of a color, is the foundation of representational drawing. Think of it like the skeleton of your portrait. If the structure underneath isn't solid, color and expressive mark making simply cannot fix it. Here are a couple of colored pencil drawings of Emma Watson that were likely made by artists new to portraits or new to colored pencil. They've captured a solid likeness, but if they improved their values, their drawings would instantly level up. Let's isolate the values by looking at them in black and white. Notice how the only dark areas are the eyes, nostrils, and lips. There are no shadow shapes on the face, which makes the features float on the face instead of feeling like part of the three-dimensional form. Now, this can totally work if you're intentionally going for a stylized look, but not so much for representational drawing. This drawing of Emma Watson has some color issues that we'll address later on, but the values are solid. Look what happens when I remove all the color. There is clear structure, form, and depth. The eyes and lips are part of the face rather than decorations placed on a flat surface. And that's the power of strong, well-organized values. So how do you know if you have a value problem? I recommend taking a photo of your drawing and converting it to black and white. Ask yourself honestly, does it look three-dimensional? Do the values describe how the form turns in space, or are the features floating? Can you identify clear shadow shapes, or does it look patchy and busy? Artists that struggle with value often rely on outlines to define their forms, like this example. Do you need outlines to define your work, or can your shapes stand on their own? If you're new to portraits, or if you've identified value issues in your work, this is the skill to master before worrying about color. And like it or not, solid values start with a solid photo reference. If your reference has blown out lighting and no clear shadow shapes, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle before you ever pick up a pencil. And that's honestly probably what happened with these first Emma Watson drawings. Fashion photography is notoriously bad for portrait references because it intentionally blasts away all the natural shadows. Once you have a strong photo reference, it's time to train your eye. My favorite exercise, and the one that I recommend to absolutely everybody, is the 2-value study. Break down your reference into just light and dark. No blending, no details, no color. I actually recommend that you use a marker here so that you are forced to commit to your shapes. This instantly teaches you how to design shadows that work and accurately describe your subject. If you want to practice this exercise, I have a free project guide for you down in the video description. Once you are comfortable identifying shadow shapes, the next step is practicing with just one pencil. You can choose either a traditional graphite pencil or one single colored pencil like I did here for this portrait. Start by blocking in your strongest shadow shapes first, then slowly build up your halftones. Resist the urge to outline. Let your value shifts do the work, and don't be afraid of a few lost edges here and there. They often make a drawing feel more natural and more expressive. Artists who train in traditional ateliers often spend a full year working only with value before ever touching color. Now, I'm not saying that you need to wait that long, but I am saying that isolating value in your studies and making sure your skills are solid is the clearest path to eventually creating representational drawings that have amazing form and that you're truly proud of. And this is exactly how I teach color inside the Color Lab. I help you master one skill at a time so that color becomes easier, more intuitive, and way more fun. A few years ago, I worked with a student who really wanted to refine her portrait skills. Her proportions were spot on, her drawings were clean and careful, but they still lacked that spark and energy that makes a portrait feel alive. I don't have photos of her earlier work, but here are a few drawings I found online that have that same quality. They're technically solid, they have decent values, but the skin looks a little dull, almost like Barbie plastic. It doesn't show the depth and life that's actually beneath the skin. So, how does this happen and what do we do to fix it? When I looked at the colors my student was using, I realized that she was relying heavily on the browns, beiges, and pre-made neutrals in her set. So I challenged her to make her next drawing without using any of these colors. No browns, no beiges, no grays. And this is what she created. Are the skin tones perfectly realistic? No, but this drawing has so much more life and energy than her earlier portraits did. That energy comes from color. Now, I'm not saying that you need to ditch the browns forever. I use them all the time. But when you're newer to color, browns can become a shortcut, a way to simplify what you see without actually paying attention to the hue, the temperature, or intensity of a color. And that shortcut almost always leads to muddy shadows, dull skin, and portraits that feel flat. If you want to mix skin tones that are realistic but still vibrant, I still recommend removing browns for a project or two. But you don't have to create a full rainbow portrait. Instead, focus on mixing your neutrals. That's exactly what I'm doing here in this example. This is my 3-pencil magic exercise where I only use the primary colors to mix every other color that I need. And for this particular portrait, I also added in a black pencil to help with the eyelashes and some of those darker accents. If you want to try this exercise, there's a free project guide down in the video description, along with a link to my mini course where I provide you with more video examples, warm-up exercises, and hands-on support. Limited palettes are incredible teachers because you almost never have the perfect pencil. You are forced to look closer, think more critically, and mix your colors with more sensitivity, which massively improves your intuition for any subject matter, but particularly for portraits. As you do this exercise, you'll start to notice things that you may have never seen before, like little temperature shifts in the cheeks and those cooler neutrals in the jawline. This exercise is an amazing training tool that will help you choose richer, more dynamic colors when you expand your palette back out. As you move forward, you can totally use browns again. I certainly do, but now you're going to use them purposefully. Browns become tools for muting, refining, or adding specific nuance, rather than the main ingredient for skin tones. So, once you stop relying on browns and beiges and you start really noticing the nuance and temperature shifts in skin, there's a new problem that often pops up. You end up going a little overboard. You inject vibrant color, but the result feels jumpy, chaotic, or random. Remember this earlier example, the portrait with great proportions and solid values? Now look closely at the colors. There are a lot of bright pinks and yellows, but they don't feel particularly grounded or realistic. Before we go further, I need to clarify what I mean by realistic, because believe it or not, there are several different types of realism in the art world. The type of realism that ends up getting the most attention in the colored pencil world is hyperrealism or photorealism. This is an ultra-detailed approach that focuses on drawing or painting every detail exactly as it appears in the photo, every hair, wrinkle, and freckle. This type of drawing requires a lot of focus and a long attention span, but it doesn't really require any creative problem solving or interpretation. I have dabbled with this style, but the type of realism I am more interested in as an artist and as a teacher is classical realism. Classical realism comes from a long tradition of drawing and painting directly from life, models, still life, and the natural world. And this started long before photography existed. This type of style focuses on strong design, clear value structure, accurate drawing, and intentional simplification. The artwork is more of an interpretation, and you can see a bit of the artist in the finished piece. When you work in this style, a photo isn't the final destination. It's just the starting point. And because we're not copying a photo, there's far more decision-making involved. This kind of representational drawing is incredibly rewarding, but it's also challenging. A photo shows you everything, every pixel, every tiny shift, every odd artifact in the camera, and as an artist, you must decide what you're going to keep, what you're going to exaggerate, and what you're simplifying. Those decisions do not come from memorizing color theory, and they don't come from owning 150 colored pencils. They come from understanding what actually works on paper. And one of the best ways to learn what works is through something artists have relied on for centuries: master copies. A master copy is where you draw or paint a reproduction of a piece of art instead of working from a photo. When you create a master copy, you're moving slowly and studying how the original artist made his or her decisions when they interpreted their subject. You get to see where they pushed color and where they neutralized color, where they simplified their shapes, how they handled their warm to cool transitions, how they created unity without making the colors boring, how they grouped and simplified their shadows, which details they left out, and which one they emphasized for design purposes. You're going to reap the biggest benefits from master copies if you select a masterpiece that embodies the type of artwork that you would eventually like to make. And you can take this one step further by copying a painting or a drawing that has some similarities to the reference that you're going to use for your next piece. If I were working from this photo of Emma Watson as Belle, I might select this Sargent painting. I would pay attention to the colors that Sargent used around the eyes and the cheeks and how he injected some of those pinks without going overboard. I would also look at the cool tones in the upper eyelid and see how those colors transitioned into the shadow shape. I would look at where he added variety to the skin tone, where he kept it more simple, and I would also look at the soft yellows that he used in the clothing to see if this would work in the Belle portrait as well. When you do a master copy, the original artist has already solved the problems that you're struggling with. They've figured out how to use color to create harmony, depth, and emotion. And when you copy their decisions, those solutions begin to become tools in your toolbox. And when you practice these solutions in your original artwork, they begin to become part of your artistic DNA. Of course, you can absolutely choose a masterpiece and create a copy on your own, and you're going to learn a ton from that. But if you want to get even more out of the process, doing a master copy with the guidance of someone that is trained in classical realism makes a world of difference. An experienced instructor can point out the subtleties that you might overlook, explain why certain color decisions work, and help you translate those choices into your own drawings. This kind of guided practice is one of the reasons that we include master copies inside the Color Lab. Along with demos, I also give personalized critiques on each project, so you know exactly what's working in your piece, what to adjust, and what steps to take next. It removes so much of the guesswork and it accelerates your understanding of color and design. Another common color mistake that artists make is choosing colors based on the local color only. I see this constantly, especially in portraits. Blonde hair, let's color it all in yellow. Lips, well, that will require a pink or a red pencil. And blue eyes, blue pencils. The result is portraits that feel overly intense or a little flat like a coloring book. What's happening here is that the artist is focusing more on the local color or the default color that we associate with an object instead of how the color actually changes as the form turns in space or reacts to different light. Let me illustrate this with something simple. Take these bananas. Their local color is yellow, but every plane of the banana isn't hit by the light at the same angle. Some areas are lighter, some are duller, and the red paper underneath bounces warm reflected light into the shadow areas. Even with something as simple as fruit, using just the local color wouldn't be accurate. Now, think about how much more complex human skin is. Real skin is influenced by so many factors: the direction and the quality of the light, reflected color from clothing or the environment, temperature shifts from blood flow, and the bone structure underneath. This list goes on, and using just the obvious pencils is not going to work. But how do you train your eye to stop choosing colors based on assumption and start choosing and mixing colors based on what's actually there? I recommend a color isolation drill. Take your reference photo and zoom way in on a tiny area. When you remove the surrounding context, you're left with pure color. Now try to mix that color. Don't worry about finding one perfect pencil. Instead, use 2 or 3 different pencils to build it up. Mixing forces you to look more closely. It reveals what's really happening in the color, not what your brain thinks should be happening, and it results in a more dynamic final product. Looking past local color and noticing all the transitions and subtleties takes time. But once you develop this skill, your portraits immediately become more dimensional, expressive, and lifelike. Another mistake artists make is spending way too much time on each drawing. When every portrait you make takes 20, 30, or 40 hours, you aren't getting enough repetitions to actually master your craft. This means that you have very few opportunities to experiment with different color combinations, almost no time for improving that initial block in and shadow shape design, and all of your energy is going into slow and careful rendering. That's why I'm a huge fan of creating quick, small portraits. This one is just 4 by 6 inches, and while I can't pack in every detail to these small studies, I am able to finish them in just a few hours, and I can still remember all the decisions that I made at the beginning of the process. When it comes to drawing, I firmly believe that focusing on quantity is way more important than focusing on quality. When you focus on quantity, the quality always comes. If you're wondering how you can make more art even when you're busy and still learn color theory along the way, check out this video where I share my top tips and I show you the opening pages of a sketchbook that I completed in record time.